NEPM's podcasts are funded by Armbrook Village Senior Living in Westfield, offering assisted living and compass memory support with evidence-based treatment for those with memory loss. More at armbrookvillage.com.
Welcome to the Fabulous 413. I'm Khalees Smith.
And I'm Monty Belmonte. Later in the show, we'll hear a brief history of Shakerism and cider making with folks from Hancock Shaker Village in Pittsfield and the couple behind Berkshire Cider Project in North Adams.
We'll get the 413 angle on the Paris Olympics and hear when Florence's own gold medalist Gabby Thomas will run again from NEPM News Department's Adam Frenier.
And we'll hear some incredible live bop music with jazz guitarist Sheryl Bailey playing in Northampton tonight.
But first...
Time for our weekly conversation with U.S. Congressman from the 2nd Congressional District of Massachusetts, Worcester's own Congressman Jim McGovern. After a couple of tumultuous weeks at the top of the ticket in the race for president on the Democratic side, the ticket is now set. Tim Walz is the vice president's choice for vice president as she runs for president. Former Minnesota governor, former colleague of yours in the House of Representatives. For the last 2 weeks on the show, Congressman, you listed him as your, quote, sentimental favorite. And now there are all these sentimental memes from the left with pictures of him getting hugged by kids and dogs. Yeah. Some people have been likening him to the dad or granddad that right-wing rhetoric stole away and replaced with someone filled with more vitriol and fear and anger. What's your thoughts now that Tim Walz is the choice for vice presidential candidate for the Democratic ticket?
Well, I'm thrilled. I mean, I think the world of him. He's our friend. I serve with him in Congress. My wife knows his wife, Gwen, very well. My kids know his kids, Hope and Gus. And, when he ran for governor, my wife, Lisa, and daughter, Molly, went to Minnesota to campaign for him. So we, on a personal level, are really excited about the choice. But here's the deal. I mean, he's authentic, and he tells you what he thinks. And he's a regular person. And contrast that to the doom and gloom on the Republican side. I mean, I think this Harris-Walz ticket really, to use his word, is about joy. It's about a future that we can feel good about. And when they talk about differences with people, I mean, they don't refer to people who have a different opinion as their enemy. They talk about their neighbors and how we need to try to persuade our neighbors to get on board. And I think the country really is yearning for something different than, Trump and Vance and finger pointing and heat peddling and all the negativity. I think people want a president, vice president who understand that we are a team and that we need to be united, and we may have our differences, but we need to keep on cheering on America. And, he was a football coach, so he knows how to build a team, and he knows how to build a winning team. He took a team that had a total losing streak and turned them into champions. So
this is like Little League football, like Pop Warner football too, right? This isn't like college football or anything like that. Yeah. So this
is
absolutely very middle-aged dad vibe going.
But he's done good things. As I mentioned to you, one of the things he saw when he was a teacher was that lots of kids coming to school with who were hungry, who didn't have meals. So one of the first things he did as governor was to implement universal free school meals for all kids in Minnesota schools. I mean, he was the head of Massachusetts, and you listen to the testimonials from his students who really adored him and who appreciated his counsel when they went through difficult times. So I think this is a good ticket. I mean, the other side is going to try to rip him apart, rip her apart. Donald Trump, I think, posted they're communists. I mean, really? I mean, come on, give me a break.
My friend who is a lifelong communist and lived in Northampton for a long time, Vijay Prashad, wants to assure everybody that they are not real communists.
But the point of the matter is that I think the vibe that they're giving off in their initial appearances together is really hopeful. And I give the vice president credit too. She's not taking the bait. She's not going down the road Trump and Vance are going down. And Vance showing up at their rallies because he can't get a crowd himself is creepy. I mean, I don't know. I find that kind of creepy. And Trump is holed up in Mar-a-Lago somewhere, and he's going to do a rally, I think, in that well-known swing state, Montana. So I don't even know what he's thinking right now. He's probably fuming.
What about the electoral math behind this pick of Tim Walz? There were some people that were hoping that Vice President Harris would choose someone like a Josh Shapiro for Pennsylvania. And how do you think this is going to play out with the electoral math, having this former Minnesota governor, Tim Walz, at the second tier on the ticket?
So when you pick a running mate, it's a personal decision. You're going to have to work with this person, not only during the campaign, but through your presidency. So you want to have somebody you feel comfortable with. I think somebody who will kind of complement you and what you're trying to do. Don't forget, when Bill Clinton won, I mean, he picked Al Gore. And a lot of people were like, why is the guy from Arkansas picking a guy from Tennessee? Why aren't you picking somebody from California or from Michigan or Ohio? It actually turned out to be a pretty good pick. And they complemented each other. And, their calculation was, this is really not just about picking off a state. This is about creating a vision for the future. Look, I think Josh Shapiro is spectacular. I think he's an effective governor. I don't agree with him on everything, but he's an effective governor. And he gave a brilliant speech, I think, at the rally the other day. But she made this choice. I think she made the right choice. And I think Tim Walz's appeal can resonate with people that, quite frankly, have kind of written us off.
And by that you mean sort of like working class, middle America, maybe Rust Belt America, right. The Midwest, all that kind of thing.
Yeah, and by the way, people who, when they vote for Republicans, in essence, are voting against their own self-interest. And I think he can help get their attention. I'm not sure we can win everybody over, but the bottom line is, in those areas where we have not done well, we will shrink the margin so that it gets tighter, and maybe we'll win some of those places. But I just heard this morning that a whole bunch of new states have gone into play as potential swing states that only a week ago were labeled by the Cook Report as leaning Republican. And I did my little town meeting yesterday in Greenfield. We had a great crowd at the library. I love that library. It's wonderful.
It's wonderful.
And for you, I got the Catalpa coffee. I didn't get Dunkin' Donuts coffee.
Thank God. Catalpa is good. That will allow it.
Yeah, I wanted to let you know I listen. But in any event, I mean, most of the people there I talked to were pretty excited about this ticket. So I feel hopeful.
Speaking with U.S. Congressman Jim McGovern, McGoverning with McGovern. He joins us every Thursday. You did have this coffee with the congressman yesterday. Apart from talking about the ticket, what were some of the other concerns that the people of Greenfield and Franklin County brought to your conversation with them at the Greenfield Public Library yesterday?
I guess the question is, what issue didn't they bring up?
Uh-huh.
I mean, we talked about everything from Social Security to what's happening in the Middle East, to what's happening in Venezuela, to what's happening, obviously, in the ticket. People concerned about election integrity. We talked about the Electoral College, about ranked choice voting. People talked about challenges in terms of finding affordable housing, the flaws in our healthcare system. I mean, we had a really good crowd, and there were lots and lots of topics that we talked about, but it was a really good conversation. And I appreciate all those who showed up because it helps me, I think, be a better representative. I mean, I'm hearing from people who with firsthand experiences about, what they care about and some of the issues they have. And so I really appreciated it. Our friend Steve the Hippie was there too.
Yes.
It was great to see him. And
For those who don't know, Steve the Hippie was a listener of my old show. He lives in Gill. Yeah. He used to call into my morning show like every day. He comes on the Food Bank March. He's one of the most lovable and notable hippies in the area.
Yeah, and his family was there with him. And I thought it was a really good evening, and I really appreciate everybody who showed up.
Well, we have a listener question for this segment on the radio from somebody who's not in your district, but their congressman has so far declined to come on the show after multiple requests. Stephanie from Longmeadow said, I've been very concerned about voting rights in this country ever since Trump lost, and the Republicans have sought this path, among others, to undermine and weaken our democracy. It's one thing to recognize that Trump openly declares that he will be a dictator and end voting in this country, which I personally, as an aside, think maybe he was taken out of context in that quote, nevertheless. But there are so many other Republicans in office around the country doing this anti-democratic work as well. And I'll also do another aside here. Listen to Monday's podcast with Haydenville author David Daly about his new book, Anti-Democratic, for more information on that accusation. But what Stephanie wants to know is what is being done by our democracy-defending elected officials to combat these efforts?
Well, I mean, I would like to be able to pass more legislation to strengthen voting rights in this country, but we can't do that when we have a Republican majority in the House, and you need 60 votes to be able to get anything even to be considered in the Senate. But there are organizations, and the former Attorney General Eric Holder is leading an effort to try to strengthen voting rights and to call attention to where there are irregularities and where there are challenges, and filing court challenges, and making sure that none of these people who are trying to suppress the vote can get away with it, at least not get away with it easily, and they will be called out on it. So, I mean, it's a real concern. And some of the Supreme Court's rulings have resulted in a lower voter roll when it comes to communities of color. We're learning about that. So we need to be aggressive in registering new people to vote, and we need to be vigilant when we know that there are governors out there from certain states that will try to frustrate people's ability to vote. There are a team of lawyers out there ready to file suit. So we have a plan. It would be better if we were in charge so that we can ensure that every person in this country has a right to vote, but we're taking it very seriously. And we're also taking seriously the threats of potential violence if Trump loses. I mean, we know that there are people that are planning a reaction if the former president does not prevail. And I hope he doesn't, but we have to take that threat very seriously as well.
Stephanie from Longmeadow had a follow-up question of a similar note, saying that one of the claims Republicans made in 2020 was that there were ballots cast by convicted criminals who didn't have the right to vote because of their felony conviction status. I haven't heard a lot of people talking about this, but Trump is a convicted felon according to the state laws of Florida, where he has a residency, and New York, where he was convicted. He should be disenfranchised. Will he be allowed to vote in November? And if so, how is this fair and just to the millions of Americans who are disenfranchised because of their felony conviction status?
Yeah, I to be honest, I assume he will be allowed to vote. I'm not sure. I'm not a legal expert, but nonetheless, Stephanie points out an important contradiction here, and that is, Trump repeatedly talks about the fact that he believes that people who have been convicted of any kind of crime should not be allowed to vote. They should be disenfranchised, and yet he has been convicted and is allowed to vote. Look, I think there's going to be a lot of attempts to try to frustrate people's ability to vote. But I do think, unlike 2016, I think we are in a better position to call it out and to fight it.
Speaking with U.S. Congressman Jim McGovern, McGoverning with McGovern, I'm interested in hearing your thoughts on the new Massachusetts policy on overflow migrant shelters. According to our parent company, WGBH, under the new policy, people will not be allowed to stay more than 5 days in the state's 4 overflow shelter sites, which will be renamed temporary respite centers. People will also have to wait at least 6 months before they can qualify for placement in a longer-term emergency assistance facility. Massachusetts Governor Maura Healey said that Massachusetts is out of shelter space and cannot continue to afford the size of the system, and that the new policy will help open up space at a temporary respite center so that families have a place to stay while they work with case managers to identify alternative housing. She has previously said this is a federal issue and that Massachusetts is doing its best to try to keep up. What is your take on the new Massachusetts policy, and what is and can the federal government do to help?
Okay, I love the governor, and I need to study kind of the implications of her policy a little bit more. But here's my view. Just like I believe that food is a fundamental human right for every single person in this country, I also believe shelter is and housing is. I just want to make sure that nobody is prevented from getting shelter as a result of this. That's my bottom line. And yeah, the federal government needs to do more. We need to provide more assistance to states to be able to deal with this. So, I'm not prepared to give a thumbs up or thumbs down. My commitment is to make sure that everybody who needs shelter gets shelter.
Lastly, Congressman, as I mentioned, the Olympics are on, and they're making a lot of people feel a sense of love and joy and hope and cheer and inspiration. And in your district, another medal winner this week, Gabby Thomas, in the 200-meter women's. It happened while I was live on the radio earlier this week, so we got to announce it in real time. And we mentioned Steven Nedorosik last week from Worcester with he won a bronze medal as well as a team bronze medal. Is it industry standard, I guess, that Congress people reach out to medal winners when they win in their district? Is there any sort of back and forth between these medal winners and your office?
I posted, my congratulations to both of them on my social media. I think they're still in Paris.
Yeah. When
I come back, I'll try to get a hold of them. But you know what? It's funny. I think we all feel this way, and not just me, but I'm sure you and everybody else. I say when somebody locally wins, like you feel like we're all part of it, even though we had nothing to do with it, right? I mean, and it really is a great sense of pride. And I have to tell you, I was in Northampton yesterday. I had lots of people just tell me how proud they were of Gabby. And I was at the Florence Farmers Market, and people were telling me how excited they were. And in Worcester, Stephen's people are pulling me aside and telling me, isn't that great? Isn't that great? And I'm like, yeah. And it is wonderful. And you know what? One of the things about the Olympics that I really kind of like is that with all the stuff happening in the world, it kind of gets your mind off of all the bad news and you actually focus on something good. And so I congratulate them both, and I assume they'll both get a hero's welcome when they come back.
U.S. Congressman from the 2nd Congressional District of Massachusetts, Congressman Jim McGovern, joins us every week for McGoverning with McGovern. And if you have a question for the Congressman, you can send it my way, even if you're not from his district, thefab413@nepm.org. Thanks as always, Congressman.
All the best.
Speaking of local Olympic ties, we'll hear more about them from the NEPM News Department's Adam Frenier. And later in the show, we'll chat with Paul Arslanian. Arslanian from Northampton's Green Street Trio about the incredible jazz guitarist they are bringing to town tonight, Sheryl Bailey.
And we'll get to hear her play, too.
But up next, we're cider meets shaker at Berkshire Cider Project's farm-to-table dinner at Hancock Shaker Village in Pittsfield.
You're listening to the Fabulous 413 on 88.5 NEPM.
The Fabulous 413 podcast is funded by the UMass 5 College Credit Union, offering co-op advantage checking with cash back on all purchases, plus secure debit card controls, all from the UMass 5 mobile banking app. Insured by NCUA, umass5.coop. NEPM's podcasts are funded by Armbrook Village, offering research-based arts, music, fitness, and lifelong learning programs at their assisted living and Alzheimer's care community in Westfield. armbrookvillage.com.
Thursday, August 22nd at Hancock Shaker Village in Pittsfield is the 4th annual Cider Makers Dinner. This yearly event celebrates the North Adams-based Berkshire Cider Project's year-long partnership with the Hancock Shaker Village, a living history museum, a Berkshire's institution, and the oldest working farm in the region.
Each year, the cidery creates a small batch cider made from apples hand-harvested at the village, heirloom varieties that are rarely grown in commercial orchards today. This wild fermented cider is likely close to what the Shakers themselves would have enjoyed. After cocktails in the working gardens on Thursday the 22nd, Chef Kevin Kelly of After Hours GB will prepare a farm-to-table meal served alongside hand-selected cider pairings.
Joining us from Berkshire Cider Project is the husband and wife team of Cat Hand and Matt Brogan. Berkshire Cider Project opened in July of 2020 at the Greylock Works facility in North Adams, a former textile mill turned event venue, co-working space, and food incubator. Cat manages the business while maintaining a role in corporate sustainability, and Matt is the head cider maker.
And joining us from Hancock Shaker Village is their executive director and CEO, Carrie Holland. Following her time as vice chair of their board of trustees and a term as interim director, Carrie became the executive director in 2023. Carrie is a Pittsfield native who returned to the Berkshires in 2015, following time spent in the D.C. area, focused on a career path in national security. So from national security to Hancock Shaker Village, we'll have to talk about that in just a little bit. But this sounds like a fun Berkshire team-up of cider and that iconic location of Hancock Shaker Village. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having us.
I guess the first question is, which apples are in the cider, and are they the same every year, or does it change depending on what the yield is?
Well, it's a great question. They definitely change depending on the yield. And more specifically, a few years ago, you may remember we had some really terrible weather in the spring that actually was really difficult on a lot of the apple crops. So last season, when we had this dinner, we were only able to make about a couple kegs. And so it was exclusive just to the dinner. But this year, we're happy to report that we had a great harvest last fall, great weather in the spring, and we are able to bottle the cider again. So we have a full couple barrels we make, which is about 120 gallons. So going from about 10 gallons back up to about 110 gallons. But the trees in the orchard at the site, we think, are easily over 100 years old. They would have been there sort of at the end of the period when the Shakers were active on the site. And they have all these great kind of historic names, not the apples you find in the grocery stores. So you have Golden Russet and Rhode Island Greenings. But we're really excited because there's some very special Massachusetts apples like Roxbury Russet and Hubbardston. And then as part of our efforts, we're actually planting new heirloom varieties to try and recreate the apples that were there. So we planted a new apple called Blue Pearmain.
I've not heard of that one.
What's that one like?
Yeah, I've heard of all the other ones before. Khalees and I are kind of cider nerdy, especially Khalees.
I love cider so much.
Yeah.
I used to volunteer at cider days and then just hang out. And
Cider Days is a huge
all
Franklin County cider event.
The cider makers. But yeah, I've never heard of that apple. What is it? What does it do?
Unlike wine, where you have maybe one variety, you have a single Pinot Noir or Chardonnay, cider is best in a blend. So a lot of time, folks would plant these orchards and they would have a whole mix of apples. Some are adding acid, some are adding tannins, some are adding aromatics. In this orchard, one of the reasons we know it was probably a cider orchard, or really designed for both fresh cider and hard cider, is because of the blends we have as opposed to your baking and cooking apples. So Rhode Island Greenings add a ton of acid. They're kind of the original Granny Smith, the great Granny Smith, maybe, if you want to go back a little further.
And anytime you have russets, they're like,
Hubbardston
you don't want to
Roxbury
eat those.
russet. No, that's the thing too. We call them spitters. These are apples where if you took a bite, you would spit them out.
We're talking about the Hancock Shaker Village 4th Annual Cider Makers Dinner happening Thursday, August 22nd. I guess tickets sell out pretty early, so we're talking about this earlier than we usually would. But joining us from Hancock Shaker Village is the new-ish Executive Director and CEO, Carrie Holland. Your role at the helm of this living museum and working farm is to bring history to life. What was the Shakers' relationship to cider?
Yeah, so, the Shakers, they lived in this closed utopian society. And they're exceptionally self-sustainable, but they also created products that they sold to the public. But they really relied on sustenance for their community from the land. And so cider is a perfect example of that. And then they would also use that as an economic driver also to bring in income for the village. They're very entrepreneurial people, and cider fits in that really well. They consumed it themselves during various periods of their history. They had interesting relationships with culinary traditions. Sometimes they were purely vegetarian and other practices were more dairy farm oriented, and they had a very purposeful, intentional relationship with their food.
I know that in the Franklin County area and other parts of the early colonial United States that a lot of people were drinking cider because potable water was hard to come by. Did the Shakers, as I think a quasi-religious community or a religious community, have a troubled relationship with alcohol at all in their history?
They certainly had temperance movements, and the Shakers were a religious community. There are still 2 Shakers. I'm actually calling in from Maine. I was just up in Sabbath Day Lake where there's 2 Shakers remaining. And so they've had a variety over the 250 years. It's been up and down with temperance movements. And in terms of water, the Shakers at Hancock specifically had excellent use of water. Not only did they have access to incredible springs, but they also used water in very interesting, innovative engineering ways as well, capturing like the hydrodynamics to help power a lot of their facilities. So the cider for them was probably in some way a form of preservation to extend the life of the food that they had, as well as, just something good to eat. They were disciplined, but they certainly enjoyed good foods as well.
We're speaking with Carrie Holland, who is the CEO and Executive Director of Hancock Shaker Village in Pittsfield, and Cat Hand and Matt Brogan, Cat and Matt, of Berkshire Cider Project, who are hosting a cider makers dinner at Hancock Shaker Village on Thursday, August 22nd.
Kat, how did this partnership with Hancock Shaker Village come about?
So we started the business in 2019. Our goal was to kind of capture the harvest that year. Everything we do is super seasonal. So in the fall, we're getting all of the apples and juice that we need to ferment for the year. And so in the fall of 2019, when we were kind of setting up the business, we found ourselves at the village walking around and all of a sudden, we were very attuned to apples at that moment. And we turned a corner and we're like, oh, I think that's an orchard over there. And it didn't appear that there was a whole lot going on with it. I think at that point, some of the apples were going into the farm CSA, but we sort of said, hey, can we take some of these apples and make a cider with it? And, in return, we're maintaining the orchard. We also donate a portion of sales of this cider back to the village to support its agriculture program. But it was really kind of by chance that we stumbled on this orchard. And as Matt said, it's a treasure trove of really gorgeous heirloom apples.
Matt, you were mentioning that some of these trees are like over 100 years old, which is really old for apples. How hard is it to maintain this orchard where it's continuing to produce these rarer strains?
For many years, the orchard was probably not taken care of in the sense of the apple. Of course, the grounds at Shaker Village are beautifully taken care of, but no one was really paying attention much to the fruit or how much fruit was yielding or necessarily the health of the trees. And it's one of those things, like if you own a house, the minute you start looking at something, it breaks, right? So I feel like in the last few years, as we've been pruning and taking care of them, we now are also discovering all the issues and cracks and branches coming down. And so if you join us for the dinner, if you come to Shaker Village anytime and you're able to wander through the orchard, you'll see a few of the trees we actually have posted up to keep their branches, supported, because they can't really bear under their own weight anymore. But that's one of the reasons it's so important that we think about the future and find the varieties that would be appropriate for the site, and plant those as new trees, what we might call sequential planting. You're absolutely right. Apple trees have a lifespan of just about 100 years or so, depending on conditions. But what's really exciting for us too, we're able to graft the trees. So apple trees, you can take a clipping from and put onto a younger tree and essentially get a clone. So we've been able to do that with some of our favorites there as well, so that essentially the trees will live on as long as, where they're making cider, and hopefully long after.
We're speaking with Matt Brogan and Kat Hand from Berkshire Cider Project, as well as Carrie Holland from Hancock Shaker Village in Pittsfield, where Berkshire Cider Project will be hosting a 4th annual Cider Makers Dinner on Thursday, August 22nd. Carrie, we've talked a little bit about Shakerism and its history, but if people aren't familiar with it at all, what's the brief history of Shakerism and how it connects to the 2 people in Maine, I guess, that you said that are still Shakers? Is that it?
Yeah. So, so this is a special year. So it's good to take a minute on the history. It's the 250th year anniversary of the Shakers' arrival in America. And actually, August 6th was the official anniversary date. It's a really, really interesting story that I think isn't told as much as it should be in our early American history. Mother Ann Lee, a woman in England, brought 7 believers with her to America. They were facing religious persecution for their beliefs. They had developed this form of what is called Shaker. It was sort of a blend of Methodist beliefs. And they came over and found freedom in America to practice as they wanted. And it was an all-encompassing religious community. So they were creating these utopian communities. And they were known for a lot of things specific to their religion. There was a lot of discipline. It was very much a love-based community, but there was a lot of discipline within that. And when I say that, they had very progressive views. So there's gender equality amongst the sexes from the get-go, and racial equality, which if you think back to the 1700s, that was pretty revolutionary. That was radical thinking at the time. And they became known over time as great entrepreneurs. They've had patents and inventions credited to them. They became known for elements of Shaker design, is how we call it now, with the furniture making, some of the textile and garments, and some of the woodworking, some architecture features as well. And so over time, their communities began to shrink, but there are 2 Shakers remaining in Maine. Actually, Brother Arnold is one and Sister June is the other. And they just celebrated this big 250th anniversary moment with other people in the Shaker scholar world and Shaker collectors and people who just really admire and appreciate the Shakers. Our site hasn't had Shakers in living there in well over 60 years, but it's still very much a living space that the community comes and finds a lot of discovery in.
It's a little sad that if these 2 people die, then the Shakerism dies with them.
I mean, people can always take up the torch.
I know, maybe I should convert.
It's okay.
You may want to look at the criteria.
Okay.
Yeah,
there's some tough bits in there.
I like the progressive part of it.
That's what I was
I like
going
that
to
you
say.
can drink alcoholic beverages.
I'm not sure if you qualify for it.
There's some very democratic, widely appreciated facets, and there's some others that are very hard to meet the criteria.
You're the oldest working farm in the area, which is a whole other thing that I think we should cover at another time. But since you have a CSA, I'm assuming, and perhaps incorrectly, that some of the produce for this dinner is going to come from your own farm and is kind of a showcase of what you grow.
Yeah, so as much as possible, we always try to highlight the food that is grown on site. It's always exciting to have that element of true farm to table experience. Like, you will look out onto the gardens where some of the food came from.
Similarly, Kat and Matt, As opposed to other orchards that you get your apples from, how directly involved in the care of the trees on the grounds are you for this cider?
Very involved. Over the last 5 years, we've worked with different orchardists and arborists to really sort of diagnose the orchard and figure out, intervention plans, particularly around pruning, because as anyone who has an apple tree knows, pruning is really, really important to open up the tree, make sure there's a lot of air in there. So another thing we do at Hancock Shaker Village every spring is a pruning workshop. So we invite folks in, you get instruction from some really excellent experts, and then you literally get to try your hand on helping us prune and care for these beautiful old trees. We're very hands-on, and then on the cider making side of it, we pick every apple. We actually shake the trees. We don't pick them.
Wow.
It is Shaker Village.
Shakers, yeah, right.
It is, exactly.
Because Shakers did shake too, right? And that's one thing we didn't mention, Carol. That's how they got the moniker. That's part of their religious expression.
Absolutely. That was part of their hallmark calling card. The Shakers are actually a name from the outside world given to them. And it was in relation to this form of ecstatic worship that they would have with their dances. And they would have these very extreme physical expressions of religious worship.
Another check in the pro-convert to Shakerism column.
Yeah, we get to dance at prayer. Oh, yeah, no, I'm there.
I love that.
I can connect you with the folks at Sabbath Day. You do a deep dive and let me know.
Okay, I'm going to think about it.
I definitely don't qualify anymore.
I've already been kicked out of 2 other Christian facets, so forget it. Matt, I know that your life previous was an architectural consultant for performing arts centers and theaters. Have you worked in theaters in our area that we would have heard of doing some stuff?
Yeah, well, my wife and I live up in Williamstown, and I had done some work both at the Clark and Williams College. But it was a really fun job that it seems in some ways so unrelated to cider making that I think I got a lot of crazy looks when I left this career. But I actually think there was a through line that always made sense to me, in the sense of creating events like our dinner here at Shaker Village and creating a way of bringing people together through what I often just call storytelling. We now get to bring an audience together, and it just happens that we're talking about cider, not Shakespeare.
Similar question for you, Caroline, who is the executive director and CEO of Hancock Shaker Village. You came from the national security field and military contracting. What's the through line between that and the farm and Hancock Shaker Village?
It's a very logical path. Where's the confusion? I think really Matt, Kat, and I all have very non-traditional paths to what we're doing, I will say. But I think in part it's the call of the Berkshires, and it's the call of creating things that has been just very fulfilling. I didn't mean to get off that career path, but I did. And it's just been very fulfilling. You can see very visibly the connections you make. And I just love the Berkshires. I grew up here, and any way that I can support other people finding the Berkshires and falling in love, it feels like a bit of a personal lifelong calling. This is certainly my Berkshires era.
I was waiting for Monty to make a putting yourself out to pasture joke, and he didn't, and I'm so proud.
I'm glad that you did, though, Khalees.
So now that we've talked all around the dinner, what is going to be on the actual menu on the 22nd?
We are still figuring it out. Apples will be featured, and certainly cider will be paired throughout the meal to complement all of those wonderful dishes.
Is it only hard cider, or do you have sweet cider available for people too?
So we'll have non-alcoholic options. We only make hard cider. Believe it or not, it's a bit easier to make hard cider, like you mentioned before, about why, cider was so prevalent back in the day. But we might have some sweet cider. Maybe we'll mix it in. It's certainly being used in the dishes, which is great, but there will be non-alcoholic options as well.
The event is the 4th annual Cider Makers Dinner. It's happening Thursday, August 22nd at Hancock Shaker Village in Pittsfield, and we've been joined by the executive director and CEO of Hancock Shaker Village, Carrie Holland, as well as the husband and wife dynamic duo of Kat and Matt, Kat Hand and Matt Brogan of the Berkshire Cider Project in North Adams, who are making the cider for the dinner. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks so much for having us.
We both like apple cider.
Later in the show, live jazz guitar in the studio with Sheryl Bailey, who's playing in Northampton tonight with Green Tree Trio.
But up next, celebrating Northampton's own gold medalist with the NEPM News Department's Adam Frenier.
You're listening to the Fabulous 413 on 88.5 NEPM.
NEPM's podcasts are funded by Armbrook Village Senior Living in Westfield, with support services designed to help seniors age in place, including a Compass Memory Support Neighborhood. More at armbrookvillage.com. The Fabulous 413 podcast is funded by Northeast Solar, helping customers make the switch to solar for savings, energy security, and tax incentives. Learn more at northeast-solar.com.
Welcome back to the Fabulous 413. If you are like me and many people across the United States and the globe, you are really enjoying the Olympics. And it was thrilling when we were here live on Tuesday and our director, Tony Dunn, burst in during a break and said, Gabby Thomas won the gold in the 200-meter women's. And somebody who has been following the Olympics since before Paris began is a gentleman who Khalees and I both worked with in our other radio life.
Still work with.
The former producer of Red Sox baseball with now Hall of Famer Joe Castiglione, and the voice of UMass hockey, where Khalees is the producer of UMass Amherst hockey, NEPM News Department's own Adam Frenier.
And I'll do Windows, too, if you ask me.
Okay, good, because they have been building up with detritus, so we need that to happen.
I have high hopes for this season, keeping my fingers crossed.
I got to hear you, Adam, before the Olympics began, talk with the now double bronze medalist from Worcester, Stephen Nedorosik. I barely remembered what a pommel horse was at the time. Now everyone has seen he's become a global phenomenon.
Well, Stephen Nedorosik of Worcester, not just a pommel horse athlete, but also an electrical engineering graduate from Penn State University. He's brilliant. You've seen him with the Rubik's Cube.
It's amazing.
To solve it in a few seconds. And there he was about 10 days ago trying to bring home the first medal of any kind for the men's gymnastics team in the team competition. All the pressure's on him. He had to sit around for like 2.5 hours, meditating, cheering for on his team, trying to get focused. Then the glasses came off and the real Stephen Nedorosik came out and he put in a huge performance. And, I have to admit, I know I'm a reporter. I'm supposed to be, just kind of down the middle and objective. I kind of turned into a fanboy when I was watching that. And then he follows it up again later in the week and wins another bronze in the individual competition.
He has an incredible story, as does our most recent 413 gold medal Olympian who took the bronze in Tokyo 4 years ago, Gabby Thomas.
Well, I was at Williston Northampton School where she went to prep school before going on to Harvard, and they had a watch party. And it's the middle of summer in a New England prep campus. There's usually not much going on. There was 100 people there, former teachers and faculty members and just, members of the Williston community packed in there. And you could feel the tension in the room. And I just remember it got so quiet when she got in the blocks before the race.
Oh, my God.
And then the crescendo about 22 seconds later was just amazing.
You could see her pull out right at the beginning.
Oh, yeah. Like there was so much space between her and the next person who crossed the line. It was incredible.
And I think the striking thing to me was these people were genuinely happy, not just because she went to Williston and competed when she was an 8th grader against people that were 5 years older than she was, but because every one of them told me how nice of a person she was and how much of an inspiration she's been. She came back to the Williston campus a couple of years ago, gave the commencement address, and took a bunch of selfies and had, spent a bunch of time with the students and the graduates. So people are really, really proud of her in East Hampton. 3 medals, maybe a 4th, depending on what happens in the 4x100 meter relay final, which will be on Friday. So she has a chance to bring home even more medals, and she has to be one of the best and certainly the most decorated athletes of any kind from Western Massachusetts.
So tell us one more time when we should be looking out for Gabby Thomas to be running again for potential more medals.
Well, she ran in the 4x100 meter relay for the United States earlier today, and they qualified to go to the final, which will be early on Friday afternoon. And there has been some talk she may also go in the 4x400 meter relay. We'll have to wait and see. They don't usually release the teams for those right away, but certainly look for her early tomorrow afternoon.
After this Olympics is over, there are more Olympians heading to a different Olympics. Can you tell us about that and what you're looking forward to there?
Yes, the Paralympics takes place back in Paris on the 28th of August through the 9th of September. And a couple of names, if you're watching, to keep an eye on. Famida Ayanbeku from American International College right down the road in Springfield is on the team as a track athlete, and Sage Harper of East Hampton, a rower. So a couple of more local connections to keep an eye on during the Paralympics. And I know NBC is boosting their coverage of this, just like the Olympics that are taking place right now. So it should be pretty easy to continue to watch. And not only just an inspiration to watch these folks who are dealing with physical issues or handicaps or whatnot, but you can't win enough gold medals and a chance for the U.S. to bring home even more. So certainly that'll be a fun way to wrap up the Olympic season toward the end of the month and into September.
You got a favorite sport to watch, Adam?
Oh, that's a great question, Monty. I've been watching a lot of sports that I hadn't really paid much attention to. I think that team handball is a lot of fun to watch.
Nice.
I do enjoy the track and field as well, just because there's so many disciplines and things like that. Watching pole vaulting, for instance.
I'm all of a sudden a huge French pole vaulting fan.
That's right.
Who isn't? Come on. Also, hammer throwing. Who knew? That is the craziest sport.
I love hammer throwing. It's actually like hammer throwing is my favorite track and field event.
Yeah.
It's so cool to watch people just whirl themselves around.
And hopefully know where that thing is going, because it is a little unpredictable. I must admit I've become a steeplechase devotee as well.
Yeah.
For the
so
humans or the equestrian one?
I would say for the humans, because it's not very often you see people jump through water and these terrible looking barriers they have to go over.
Honestly, I didn't realize until this year that there was a human one.
Well, there is, and I've watched it, and it's weird. Here, jump in this puddle while you're running.
I think it's better because Snoop Dogg is commentating on it.
I think he should try to go through the water jump, don't you?
I think it's better with
I
Snoop
feel
Dogg.
like he might try.
NEPM's Adam Frenninger, thank you so much for your Olympic coverage with a Western Mass bent.
Thank you.
We can't get enough live music, so up next we welcome bop guitarist Sheryl Bailey to the studio.
And we'll talk to the local jazz legend who's bringing bop to Northampton tonight, Paul Arslanian.
You're listening to the Fabulous 413 on 88.5 NEPM. Welcome back to the Fabulous 413. I'm Khalees Smith.
And I'm Monty Belmonte, and we welcome to the studio guitarist Sheryl Bailey.
Guitar Player magazine calls Sheryl one of the most compelling tones of her generation, and Frank Forte of Just Jazz Guitar ranks her amongst the best bop guitar players with a fresh approach and something new.
And tonight, Thursday, August 8th, local ensemble The Green Street Trio welcomes guitarist Sheryl Bailey at City Sports Grill at Spare Time Bowling in Northampton.
With us also is Paul Arslanian, who is the leader of the Green Street Trio and coordinator for the Northampton Jazz Workshop. He joined, and let's start with a song, shall we?
All right, let's try something.
Awesome. That's great.
That was incredible.
That's
Beautiful, Cheryl.
Thank you.
That was really sweet.
I don't know. Yeah. Thanks.
Embraceable you.
Yeah.
Nice.
That's so great.
That was
With
wonderful.
some free stuff in there.
Yeah.
Tribute to Garzone, my friend George Garzone.
That is Sheryl Bailey, who will be
Passed
playing
recently.
alongside with the Green Street Trio tonight at City Sports Grill at Spare Time Bowling in Northampton. And we're also joined by Paul Arslanian, who puts this whole thing together and has for a long time.
14 years.
Yeah. You used to play at Green Street Cafe, right?
We started at Green Street Cafe for about a year and a half, and then Smith College tore it down.
Yeah. Shame. That was one of the greatest restaurants.
It was really good. And we started small there. That was before Cheryl's time with us. And then we moved to the Clarion Hotel. And we were there for at least 3 years.
And they tore that
They tore
down.
that
And
down.
they tore that down.
So when are they tearing down the bowling alley?
Yes, right.
And I'm just kidding. That's where you are now, though.
No, it's one of the few bowling alleys around, so
Yeah.
I think it's going to be around
Me
for
too,
a while. They
yeah.
do a pretty good business. And we've been at the bowling alley at City Sports Grill now for 8 years maybe, barring a couple from the vacation for the pandemic.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's been good. And we're also at the Drake now too. Every
Excellent.
last Wednesday of the month at the Drake.
With the jam, right? Or is
We
it...
always have a jam session after the concert set. Yeah,
Which is
Cheryl's
cool.
going to join us tonight for about an hour and 15-minute set. Maybe we'll play "Embraceable You." That was
Yeah,
gorgeous.
that was beautiful.
And then there's a jam session. We encourage vocalists and musicians to come and join us. We're there until 10:30.
Sheryl, you're a guitar teacher. You teach jazz guitar at Berkeley, and you live in New York City. And
That's
but-
a haul.
Some of that's true and some of that's not.
Oh yeah, which part's not?
Well, I'm actually the assistant chair of the guitar department, so I do some teaching. But I was a professor there for over 20 years, and
So-
I do some teaching.
Do you miss
Mostly
that?
Mostly I boss people around.
Yeah. Do you like the administrative part of it rather than the teaching younger people how to play in that beautiful fashion that you just played?
Yes and no. I mean, there's some great things, fun things to do. There's some things that aren't so fun. And I do love teaching. I do love just the exchange and it's just it's a deep relationship you can get with a student, just helping them discover their path through. Especially playing jazz. There's a tradition, and then there's working towards developing your own voice, right? So, but I have, I love the discipline of and the tradition of the music. So just trying to share with folks, how do you do that? How do you approach it? And then how do you, eventually we want to come into being our own voices,
Does working with students ever shift something about your perspective of your own playing? And do you still have an opportunity to do that now that you're not really working directly with them?
I mean, all the time. I always feel, yes, I'm always learning something when I'm teaching, because, maybe somebody brings in a tune, especially maybe it's something that I've played a lot. And just in trying to break it down in a way, I'll always find something I didn't think about before. So then I get excited. I'm like, well, I'm going to go home and practice that. I mean, if you're, please go home and practice. But if you don't, I'm going to be practicing this.
This, Paul, I think you said that this is the 9th time that you brought Sheryl up?
I'm guessing right around there. It's been about 9 years, and we've tried to get her at once a year.
Yeah.
What keeps you coming back to play with the Green Street Trio in this setup? That's very unique. I don't know. I mean, how frequent this happens at other places where there's a set, but then anybody can come and jam after the set.
It's one of the traditions of jazz. It's one of the ways it's been passed down.
Yeah.
Is the jam session. That was a big part of my education in Philadelphia and in San Francisco. And that's kind of the reason why we started it, that there wasn't anything here.
Yeah.
Back in whenever it was, 2010. So, it's part of the tradition, I think.
What keeps you coming back to this one, Sheryl?
Well, first of all, Paul is swinging, and it's joy to play with him and the whole band. And we just have a great rapport. And also, I do love that thing about the jam session. It's a very friendly jam session. It's not like a cutting session.
Yeah.
And I'm always impressed by the players that come, young players, old players, all walks of life. I really love that, and I feel that it gives them a great space to just meet and create a community, because jazz to me is community music. You know,
and those young musicians, even the older ones, get to meet great artists that normally don't play in our area, and get inspired and play with them. Sometimes they get to play with them at the end of the set. We always have the guest soloist joined by some of the braver players.
Yeah. Can't stress enough how important it is to play with the people whose playing you admire, because you will pick up something, even if you don't think you're keeping up.
Absolutely. Yes.
Yeah.
I'd be terrified.
No, it's well worth it. It's well worth it, even if you're scared.
Yes.
But in the little bit of time that we have left, like, your style is pretty, it's not strictly bop, but there's a lot of bop to it. But people might not necessarily know what that means in terms of jazz. They hear jazz and they hear jazz as opposed to like the little bits of it. Right. What about your style really is indicative of bop?
Well, I guess those were my first influences, are Charlie Parker. To me, it's the music of Charlie Parker, Dizzy Gillespie, and Bud Powell, specifically. So those types of, there's a phrasing and an articulation and a rhythmic consideration, not to mention harmony. But I think the way, in terms of even a modern player, we have a shared group of harmonic ideas. I think it's more about the articulation. Right? That's what's got to be in the phrasing.
That is Sheryl Bailey. He'll be bopping tonight at City Sports Grill at Spare Time Bowling in Northampton. The food starts at 6. She'll be playing along with the Green Street Trio, which Paul Arslanian is at the helm at, and he is with us in studio as well. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah.
Pleasure. Thank you. Yeah.
Go to hear them and to learn. It'll both be good. Tomorrow on the show, Live Music Friday once again on the Fabulous 413. We welcome Greenfield-based synth-pop duo Homebody to the studio before the return to the Hatch Shell at Piscomacket Park for their 5th free Homebody and Friends show this Saturday.
I shouldn't have let you say that one. It's Peskyumsky. That was my bad.
I know.
I just hear it every day.
I'm sorry.
We'll also talk with senior editor Emily Brewster, our resident Worcester from Merriam-Webster in Springfield, about one of my favorite linguistic phenomena.
Hapax legomena! And the Wine Thunderdome returns to Revisions, who happen to be an underwriter of the show. I'm Khalees Smith.
I'm Monty Belmonte.
We'll see you tomorrow on the Fabulous 413.